Hello and welcome to this special report at XM.com. I'm Maria Pachortiz, and joining me is investment analyst Marios Hadjikyriacos. We'll be discussing the upcoming U.S. presidential election and how markets might respond to different outcomes. So, Marios, the November 3rd election between Donald Trump and Joe Biden could have a dramatic impact across different markets, from equities to commodities to currencies. And investors are scrambling to figure out exactly what that might be. What do you think is most likely to play out?
Hello, Maria. Well, if you look at opinion polls and betting markets, they both have Biden ahead quite substantially. But remember that because of how the US electoral system works, national opinion polls don't mean that much. Hillary Clinton won the popular vote in 2016, but she still lost the election. What really matters are the polls in the so-called battleground states, and those are much, much closer. So in reality, I believe that what will matter most for the markets is whether we get a unified government, where the president's party also controls both chambers of Congress. At the moment, the Democrats control the House of Representatives and the Republicans control the Senate. Now, what is the most likely outcome? If, according to opinion polls and betting markets, the Democrats are going to take everything. In that scenario, I would expect to see the dollar being hit, but the stock market rallying. So let's start with the dollar. The Democrats are very likely to introduce a massive fiscal stimulus package if they take full control. That would blow the deficit up even further, and that would likely hit the dollar. Plus, there's also, a Biden government might have more stable foreign policy. For example, he's unlikely to introduce any more tariffs against China. So that could diminish some safe haven demand for the dollar as well. Now, on the stock market part, the Democrats are saying they would raise taxes to pay for their spending, but I don't really buy into that. That's simply not how American politics works nowadays. Plus, raising taxes in the middle of a recession would be economically disastrous. So I believe that the Democrats could raise spending, but they are unlikely to raise taxes, which would be positive for the stock market. Now, there are other different scenarios of how this might play out, and the market effects could be very different under those.
And how would markets react under each scenario?
Let's leave a Republican sweep behind. That would be the scenario where the Republicans take everything, but it's a very low probability scenario because they are very, very unlikely to take the House. So let's skip that one. Let's go for the one that Biden wins the White House, but the Senate stays with the Republicans. That would imply more deadlock, more nothing passes. Basically, the Republicans would block most proposals. It would imply less fiscal stimulus, and I would argue that the deficit will increase, but not as much. So it might be a weaker dollar, but only slightly. And I would also argue that equities might also fall. So the Republicans would most probably block any hint of higher taxes, but the chances of a big spending package would also decline. And on balance, I think that would be bad news for the stock market. Now, the other scenario is Trump wins, but the government is still divided. I wouldn't expect any huge reaction under this scenario. It's basically what we have right now. So Trump stays in the White House, but Congress remains divided. If anything, I would expect Trump to focus on deregulation and foreign policy in this scenario. The trade war could escalate. That could support the dollar somewhat, but it could also be slightly positive for equities. Yes, trade tensions might flare up, but there could also be some fiscal stimulus and some deregulation which could lift equity markets a little bit. Now, the final scenario and the most important one, perhaps, is what happens if the result is contested. We had a debate today and Trump was refusing to commit to a peaceful transfer of power if he loses. Now, the last time we had this was back in 2000 with Bush versus Gore, and the stock market fell by 12% over the next 5 weeks until the Supreme Court reached a decision. Now, the dollar was more volatile, it rose first, but then it gave back all those gains to trade much lower overall because of the uncertainty, and that's what I would expect to play out if we see a contested result this time as well.
Marios, thanks so much. And thanks for joining us at XM.com.